So it's a six-fold increase, but even that massive increase only takes you to 30% of electricity generation, and that in turn is only a quarter of the amount of energy that we use.
That's still a lot of wind turbines.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it's true that wind is going to be the major source of expansion of renewable energy in the future. The government thinks that about 2/3 of the expansion is going to be from large-scale wind farms, and we'll end up with something like 25 gigawatts of capacity in that area. And we're talking about building 3 megawatt wind turbines weighing 500 tons or so in the North Sea, on land as well. 3 megawatts each turbine, but you've got to have 25 gigawatts of capacity. That is indeed a lot of wind turbines. But we're also going to invest as well in smaller scale renewable technologies, particularly things like photovoltaic cells.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of discussion about photovoltaics and people suggesting that they're not economical. Are they, or?
Well, I think that certainly was true, but I don't think it's true any longer. Another important plank in the government's plan is the introduction in April of this year of something called feed-in tariffs, FITs. These are essentially incentives to install small-scale renewable systems to generate electricity. So, for example, you can install a PV panel on your roof, and you'll get paid by your utility company for the total amount of electricity that you generate. By installing the panels, you'll save on your electricity bills, but you also be paid for any surplus that you export to the grid. Now, the combination of those payments will actually give you a fairly decent return on your investment, maybe 6% or more, which is a good return in the current economic climate. And the way in which this is financed is by effectively us consumers who don't have these renewable installations paying on our utility bills, effectively subsidising them.
So renewable energy is going to play a significant role in our electricity generation. What about the energy that we use for heating?
I think the situation here is somewhat different. We've got that 40% of our energy demand going into heating. A large chunk of that goes into heating homes, offices, hospitals, buildings in general. And here the strategy is really going to be to reduce the size of the hole that has to be filled. Now, the biggest reduction in carbon emissions from reduced energy demand is effectively going to come from improved building design and construction, and this will be brought about by successive progressive tightening of the building regulations, Part L of the building regulations, to reduce dwelling emission rates. You're going to have the Code for Sustainable Homes in 2016 saying all new homes in this country have to be zero carbon, non-domestic buildings by 2019 zero carbon, but most importantly you're going to have a substantial refurbishment of the existing housing stock, somewhere between 20 and 25 million households whose properties will have to be made more energy efficient. We're also going to have some renewables in heat generation. The government hopes that by 2020 renewables will account for about 12% of heat generation, which is not a lot, but compared with current levels of 1%, again it's a massive increase. So I think I'd summarise all that by saying that we're going to have a massive investment in non-renewable, non-fossil fuel energy, i.e. nuclear power. We're going to have a huge investment in large-scale renewables for electricity generation, but we're also going to have financial incentives for small-scale renewables photovoltaics and solar thermal in particular, and also for low carbon technologies such as micro CHP.
Yeah.
We're going to have a huge change to the way in which we design buildings, and a huge sustainable refurbishment activity, solid wall insulation, cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, super energy efficient windows and doors being installed, pay-as-you-save schemes for energy installations, smart meters, etc., etc.
So, I mean, there's a lot of changes there. Is this all achievable, or is it a lot of greenwash or hot air? What's your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I'm naturally quite sceptical about these sort of things, but surprisingly, I think the plans that I've seen emerging from government are actually quite joined up, and they're quite plausible, and there's certainly an immense amount of political will behind this across all political parties. Another favourable thing is that I don't think in the current climate that cost is going to be an issue, because this is going to be investment that's led by the private sector, and it will to a large extent go towards filling the gap that's going to be created by the reductions in public sector expenditure. I think, though, that it probably take longer than's currently planned, and particularly with the large-scale stuff like nuclear power, ramping up the nuclear industry to provide the requisite capacity. But I think if you go back to the 70s and 80s and look at the expansion of the North Sea oil and gas industry, which effectively transformed the way in which energy is supplied in our economy 20-odd years ago, that was a hugely ambitious program, technologically very challenging, extremely expensive, but was in the end a very successful example of what can be done. I'm sure the construction industry too can be legislated into compliance with the move towards a low carbon economy, but I do think there is probably a very worrying gap between reducing energy consumption, making things more energy efficient in theory, and the actual performance in practice. And this is one of the things that Professor Malcolm Bell and his team here at Leeds Met University have brought out very, very, very forcibly. I think the real problem is going to be the small scale stuff, getting the improvements that are required in the existing stock of properties. I think we're going to need many more incentives or carrots to improve things. As an economist, I'd say that the shadow price of carbon has to be increased to make the financial benefits of energy saving reflect the benefits of carbon saving. I think, as well as incentives, we're going to need more sticks to effectively force people to do the things that are necessary, and that's quite a challenge when you're talking about 20 or 25 million households. This is a challenge that I think has been met before. If you go back to the decade 1967 to 77, we had then the conversion in this country from town gas to natural gas, a huge program involving the change or conversion of 40 million appliances, 13 million properties visited and appliances changed. The scale of things is much larger now. The number of households, for example, has increased by 50% compared with then. So the challenge is a lot greater, but I think the prize that's on offer is that much greater as well. And with the right political will to persuade people and companies, to force people and companies, and to incentivise people and companies to change, I think we can meet this challenge.
We've talked through quite a lot of changes there to the way we collect and generate electricity and energy, and these issues are going to actually become more important over the next few years. So I think there's a lot of areas that we can go back and revisit, and it'd be nice to do that again, John, in some subsequent interviews. Thanks ever so much for your contribution today, and hopefully we can do this again. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.